2018 comes to a close, we begin to wind down on our 80th anniversary celebrations here at First National Bank. We started from humble beginnings in 1938, and today we are poised and prepared for the exciting challenges of another 8 decades and beyond in banking. In this special program, we will reflect on those thrilling first years as the St. Lucia Cooperative Bank. Joining us for a historic first is the former managing director, now retired, Mr. Carlton Glasgow. He ushered in the transformation from the penny bank to what we are today. And alongside Mr. Glasgow, the current managing director, Mr. Johnathan Johannes, who is leading First National Bank into a future vastly different to the colonial days of the 1930s. Our discussion is in 3 parts: the early years, the transformation, and the uncharted future. The interviewer is Bernard Fannis.
This interview celebrates the 80th anniversary of the First National Bank, and we're happy to have with us in this room here at the corporate headquarters at Rodney Bay, 2 gentlemen who have a tremendous amount of history, institutional history of banking, and also Mr. Glasgow, who will certainly want to talk to you a little bit about those initial years, just to get a feel for the context of setting up the First National Bank, which is the cooperative bank. So we have with us Mr. Carlton Glasgow and also Mr. Johnathan Johannes.
Good to
Welcome
be here.
to this special interview. Both of you are bankers, and I wanted to kind of sort of put this into context. In the mid-30s, a group of solutions were discussing, I suppose, issues, business people, and they thought, well, let's start a bank. They were business people with no banking background, as far as I can tell. And Mr. Glasgow, I'm sure probably you've interacted with some of those people, or people who knew of those people as well. What do you think was the motivation that drove them to start thinking as business people to set up a bank?
Well, thank you. I don't exactly fit into 1938, but historically, what emerged, and I considered these gentlemen businessmen in St. Lucia, I consider them the founding fathers of the bank. And at the time, there were many people in St. Lucia who were quite unbanked. As a matter of fact, a lot of the people in St. Lucia could not go to the existing bank, Barclays Bank DCO, which means Dominion, Colonial, and Overseas, which I happened to work for when I started out. So the thing narrows, and that was really the motivation, that in order to serve the greater section of the population, these businessmen, perhaps not unselfishly, set up an institution in one of their business houses, and it took off from there, because it was then a penny bank, and you could literally, I understand, deposit a penny into the bank, something which we would consider impossible now, so that was really the situation, a need to ensure that the greater section of the population, in fact, did some banking and saving.
It's quite curious, and I'm sure, Jonathan, that it's almost unthinkable now for just business people to open a bank. They would probably say, well, let's get some banking experience in there as well. But at the time when it was happening, like you mentioned, a penny bank, a penny would give you a book,
Yes.
a bank book, and that was a status symbol at the time. You have a bank book, and so you can start with that. And we'll bridge, and what I'm happy about this casting for this interview is that we bridged a lot of generations quite a bit in this interview. And so at the time, they were coming out of sugar into bananas and looking at a penny as a symbol of the bank. And Jonathan, your thinking now and your preoccupation now is that we're coming out of bananas into marijuana. As an agricultural entity, and also you're thinking of other things like using a blockchain or Bitcoin. That's a totally different thing.
Well, I mean, until recently, it meant nothing to most of us here. You know what I mean? Because blockchain technology is still very new. So in the good old days, and it's interesting how I seem to associate myself with the good old days. I used to be a young guy at that time. But the important thing was saving, because unless you have savings in your economy, you don't drive the economy. And the savings was important to those founding fathers, because that was one way to get people to assume financial responsibility. And that is the key to the whole thing. So things evolve as we go forward, and now we're into blockchain technology and Bitcoin, which we know little about, and which at the moment our central bank is struggling to get an understanding of.
So, Johnathan, that's going to be part of your challenge, and we'll discuss that later on in the interview. But I wanted to ask you in terms of, even assuming this responsibility of this job here, when you were reviewing and reflecting on the achievements of this bank, when you look at the history of it and the founding, what are some of the key lessons that you learned in accepting this job?
Well, the principles, as Carlton said, the bank emerged at a time when St. Lucians felt they had no alternative. And I'm looking at the times now, and I see us getting back to that time. If we look at what's happening today, it takes a national bank to be there for people, because the banks that we couldn't use back when First National or St. Lucia Cooperative were founded are now becoming the banks that we can no longer use because they are leaving us again. So when I looked at First National to take on this role, I felt a great sense of pride in coming to work for a bank that has been around and been part of the landscape and fabric of St. Lucia, and who started off with the noble belief that we need to give St. Lucians an opportunity to have a better life and to have access not just to savings, but to financing opportunities to advance their lives and those of their families. And I think that we have, over the years, held true to that. And as time goes by, we will be called upon a lot more to be there for St. Lucians.
Mr. Glasgow, there was no hesitation in calling it the penny bank. They were proud of the fact that they were a penny bank, that they were a very St. Lucian bank. I know they were at the time, they were the banks, and you mentioned towards the Dominion, the colonial of what we were talking about. But they decided as gentlemen that we want this to be ours. We don't want, influences of the other banks in there at the time. And for a while, they focused on, most of the managers were ex-civil servants, so they sort of kept the distance from bankers. What do you think was the motivation for maintaining that particular route?
To take in the route of...
at the time, because just getting ex-civil servants to be the managers, because they didn't bring in bankers.
In these early days, ex-civil servants would have been the persons with some kind of financial knowledge and financial expertise. Of course, banking is a different kettle of fish, but they did the best that they could. And there are many people on whose shoulders we stood in order to get the bank where it is. I think of people like, I refer to him as old Mr. Fibbles, but he was one of the longest serving managers at the time. There were people like Emmanuel Theodore, who, in my view, transitioned the bank from being a savings and loans institution to something of a commercial bank where checks were written on accounts and so on. And then these were followed by people like Alnita Simmons, the late Alnita Simmons, who came out of the Barclays experience and had a banking experience and took it to a level where it started to be competitive. And of course, I had the good fortune to come in for 12 years, and we had a different vision altogether to make it literally the bank of choice.
And when you reflect on the history, obviously there's some names that stand out. There are a lot of names, but just a few of the names, obviously George Palmer.
These are directors.
Directors who started.
I thought you were talking in terms of managers.
Yes, yeah, we'll get to that as well, but we're now celebrating the founders as well. So even John Pilgrim was a journalist.
Oh, absolutely.
As well.
He was
Jacob Charles.
He was the main founder, and I had the privilege of working with his son, Bam Charles, who was in fact the chairman of the bank, of the board, when I came on board. So there is a long tradition of people who held important positions in the community, and though they did not have banking expertise per se, they were of the mercantile class, And therefore, that gave them an insight which most of the population in St. Lucia did not have.
Jonathan, it's quite interesting that it wasn't, when it was being set up, it wasn't the family concern. There were families involved. They even tried to keep, they didn't want too many of one industry influencing it. Interestingly enough, it wasn't like a government-dictated institution. And at the time, they were a little relaxed in terms of legislation. So when they were forming there was no regulations and legislations to restrict them. When you reflect on that, talk to us about how much did that allow the institution to survive, to shape its own character and abilities?
Regulation is a good thing. I'll start by saying that. But in the early stages, it gave the bank the opportunity to try new things, to find itself, if you would say that, to raise capital from all avenues. The regulations now have been put in place to help protect the banks from themselves, if you want to call it that. And whilst it has changed for the better, I think the establishment back then and allowing First National to grow organically in a less regulated environment has done it well. If you were to start a bank today, if a group of St. Lucians wanted to start a bank today, it would be almost impossible to get a banking license. The capital you would need alone would be very restrictive. So thankfully, we had those visionaries back in 1938 who saw an opportunity, who capitalized on it, and who gave us this solid foundation to be First National Bank today.
Mr. Glasgow, I'm sure you probably know the location of Jewel Street, and now we are the corporate headquarters there. So you've come a pretty long way.
It's interesting that you have that segue into all history as far as
we want to cover in the initial phases.
I have absolutely no idea where it was located previously. I know that historically it was somewhere on that street.
On that street,
but I have no idea where that is.
From what I read, is the last
Precisely.
store.
That is correct. Right. But I guess he was one of the directors, and he rented the premises to the guy, to the thing, and so on and so forth. But that's another story. The interesting thing I want to note here is that this fever of forming local indigenous banks was not in St. Lucia only. If you check the history, you'll see that a similar institution emerged in St. Vincent and in Grenada. Now, I mean, how did that fever get there? In an age where the communication was slower than it is now by leaps and bounds, but the need to offer banking services to indigenous people was spreading around. And I'm sure as we go throughout the Caribbean, you'll find that other type institutions were established, but the similarity between the St. Vincent operation, St. Lucia operation, and the Grenada operation, and in particular the Grenada operation, has maintained that similarity up to today.
Yeah. One of the key things, obviously, it was empowering solutions as well. They were able to save, but they were also able to get loans to build homes. And I was reading somewhere that for some of the cottages, they referred to as cottages, were able to put tin roofs and linoleum on the floors and so on. So you could see that the bank started changing lives almost immediately. It was also very instrumental in the transition from sugar to bananas and so on. And sugar kind of democratized, bananas kind of democratized it as well, because the sugar plantations were owned by plantation owners, and then farmers started owning their own process. So talk to us about how critical it was for the bank to now shift into serving the needs of the ordinary solutions.
Well, it was a natural takeoff, because if you were founded for a certain purpose, when the persons who fitted that category came to you, you had to find ways and means of assisting. Now, the bank, up to the time that I myself came into the then St. Lucia Cooperative Bank, was extremely conservative, extremely. They were extremely risk averse, and while they assisted people, they were mindful of the fact that they were actually lending out people's pennies, if you get me. So the need to protect your savings and help people out was always a dynamic that was present with them. as things move forward, you find that the bank becomes a little more skilled in handling this matter, and I think today, I would say it's on par with any other any lending institution. I'm sure you'll agree.
I totally agree. I think we are still a very prudent bank.
Yeah.
We take calculated risk, but as Carlton said, our skill sets have advanced, and we have evolved with our St. Lucian people and their demands. So last year, I think it was a proud moment for us that we were able to go up in a competitive bidding process against the international banks and secure the opportunity to finance perhaps one of the largest investment projects by another powerful indigenous St. Lucian company, Lucilec, and their first solar farm in St. Lucia. Yeah. So it was a proud moment for us at First National to be able to win that. It said to us that we were doing something right. And I think it said to the market that this is an institution that is going places and one that they can be proud of.
Yeah, the bank had, as you mentioned, investments. The bank had taken a very decision earlier on to as well to also get involved with government projects and so on. I remember the loans being given to the government for dredging the Gastres Harbour, for paying water bills and so on, and also a number of other national projects. So that started very early, becoming the character of a national bank at the time.
And we have continued in that vein. If we don't look after our people, who's going to do it? I think there's enough evidence to suggest that companies look after the interest of their shareholders. And when we look at the banks in our marketplace, the shareholders of most of the banks aren't St. Lucians. But our bank is 100% owned by St. Lucians. It's 100% managed by St. Lucians, and our board is all St. Lucian. And that's something we should be proud of. So when I say, if we don't look out for our people, who will? I really mean it genuinely. And a few weeks ago, you would have probably heard in Parliament that again, First National Bank has stepped up to the plate to assist government with infrastructure projects. And I know the talk show circuits and a lot of people had comments to make, but I keep saying to them, if we don't invest in the development of our country and we go off and buy bonds in Antigua and buy bonds in St. Vincent, we help in fuel their economic growth. We need to take stock and continue to support local, and in doing that, it means developing our people and financing certain government projects that lead to development.
And just putting in the context that the first probably loan they gave the government was about 400,000, and now we're talking about
36 million, yeah.
But I mean, that indicates to the growth of the bank in terms of the progress and so on.
Indeed.
Mr. Glasgow, I wanted to quote something from Mr. Vincent Flosack. At the time, we talked about contributions to national development, and he said the most valuable contribution to the development of the state wasn't the fact that the bank had made progress or had profit and whatever it was, but he said the most valuable contribution was the extreme tolerance and sympathy that we have shown to defaulters. That showed how much the bank cared about its members, that even if you defaulted, we still are there for you. And I was thinking at the time, probably, and he said that by losing arrears as long as possible, so they were in for the long haul with their members. That says quite a bit, and I suppose that tradition has continued about caring for your customers.
Yeah, the thing about it though is, while my own view is that while you care for your people, you also are running a business. And because you would find yourself letting your people down if you didn't harness their deposits with you, if you are not very careful how you disperse the funds and ensure that you had a return on investments, because at the same time your shareholders are looking for a return on their investment, your savings people looking for a good rate on their accounts and so on and so forth. So the balancing act is always there. And this is what all bankers are engaged in. But with particular reference to what Sir Vincent said at the time, I would put it in the context of the time, because you evolve out of that situation. You continue to care, but you've got to train people to ensure that this is not a gift we've given to you. You know, this is money we've lent you, and the money we've lent you belongs to other people. So you've got to pay it back. You know, there are people who have the idea that the bank have money. So if they borrow the money from the bank, they don't have to pay it. And they tell you, this is we bank, and we don't have to pay it back. Well, I totally disagree with this. I was very firm on people paying back. We will lend you money, but you will pay it back. And the dynamics changed as time moved forward. You had to be a little more circumspect in the early days, but as you start to get more professional, you cannot tolerate too soft an approach, because it could lead to the demise of the same institution that you're trying to build.
So careful and caring.
Absolutely.
And that continues up to this day.
That most definitely continues. And I'll add to what Carlton said, and say that you have to do it with a certain degree of dignity. You must always remember that sometimes people fall on hard times, and that doesn't make them a bad person because they have a bad debt.
Oh, absolutely.
And we need to find ways and hold true to the philosophy of finding ways to work through the difficult times with those clients. We're deadly serious about making those payments and getting the collections, but we definitely want people to remember, you don't run when times get hard. You don't run away from the institution.
That's right.
You run to the institution and see how we could help make things better.
We will continue this journey as the St. Lucia Cooperative Bank enters a new century, its rebranding and the embrace of smart banking.
Born from the same soil, growing stronger.
Raised of our own sweat and toil, doing it together.
Our bank for you and me,
Taking us forward so proudly.
First National Bank, the best of who we are. First National Bank, together we'll go far. The pride of St. Lucia, here to stay.
Growing up, growing stronger, it's a First National way.
Every day we're making better, faster and smarter, convenience like no other.
First National Bank,
The best of who we are. First National Bank, together we'll go far.
we'll go far. For decades, every day, it's clear, it's true.
First National Bank, we're here for you.
Welcome back to our 80th anniversary special as we reflect on the initial years of the St. Lucia Cooperative Bank, the Penny Bank as it was affectionately known. Now to the conversation of the rebranding and positioning of First National Bank as a leader in smart banking.
So we want to talk about the turn of the century now.
Okay.
And Mr. Glasgow, that falls straight into the court. And you came in from the banking sector. So probably the early directors would probably have looked at you differently, since they were not looking at bankers at the time, but you came in and the bank had changed and evolved and so on. And you had the experience of banking and coming into the penny bank, the cooperative bank, at a critical point. When you came in, when you walked through the doors, and you knew the bank, you knew the people who were involved with it, what was your thinking as you walked into that institution?
Well, one of the things that I knew immediately, that the bank had been managed by a banker. Like I mentioned, Alnita Simmons, the late Alnita Simmons, had in fact done a lot of work in on what you call the HR side and the administration side. So she had done some very valuable work here. But I distinctly remember the chairman of the board at the time saying to me that the bank is hemorrhaging because we had a tremendous bad debt situation, and I do not believe that the loans portfolio was in the best shape ever. You know, And there were many other things that needed to be done. So I realized immediately that there was a challenge to take the bank from what I described as just about getting commercial, from the savings and loan to commercial. And you need to really make it competitive because things were changing rapidly. Other institutions were modernizing, and you needed to get up to speed very quickly. Now, I was fortunate in that when I came in, I was able to get individuals from Barclays, for example, who were retiring or about to retire. And there were some other persons that we brought in from outside to supplement, so to speak, the very good persons who were already here. But you needed to expand on that. And in speaking of this, I remember a lot of the hard work, the technology side that you mentioned. A lot of hard work was done by Joe Fede because he had long experience in technology and IT and so on, banking, gotten trained in the UK and so on. So I thought he was a good fit. And on the HR side, we had we had Beryl Carrasco, yes, Beryl Arlene. And she had been there a while, but she was one of those solid persons as far as HR was concerned. On the question of your lendings and recoveries, we had Clara Taylor there. So there were a number of people who were already in situ. And we brought in some other people to credit cards, for example. We brought in, and I noticed from your latest that credit cards is doing very well. Yes. You know, we brought in someone that I thought was very skilled in this area, and it has been moving forward. And on the accounting side, we got Ms. Lafayette. We were very fortunate to get Mrs. Lafayette to come in. And then we started to do, as you can see, what we were trying to do is to broaden the perspective of the bank, its approach to the market. And then we got the inimitable Robert Favre to look at the question of going into the marketplace and communicating with the people and letting people know we are here, which was essential. Because in my mind, there was tremendous goodwill for the bank, tremendous goodwill. But those same people who had the tremendous goodwill saw the bank as moribund. And so you needed to give it a stab so that it could move on. And we did this. It was hard work, but one of the first things I recognized that we had to do to achieve this was to change the name. So in direct answer to your question, my first thought before I came into the bank was that the name has to change. And that was not an easy task. It wasn't, because the shareholders and the directors, they loved the name, the St. Lucia Cooperative Bank, for sentimental reasons and historical reasons. But I had to be practical about this. It was not biting in the new environment. And so after much persuasion, it was agreed, and it has worked, I must say.
I'm trying to think of what the thinking was behind you. You had the first without an F.
I beg your pardon?
The first in First National Bank without an F.
Yes. Well, right. This was another thing I thought about clearly, because first everybody puts F-I-R-S-T. So I thought it would have served several purposes to use one ST, because first it was aspirational in the sense that our team had to look forward to something that they had to be first in anything they did. In their service to the public, you know, we took on the mantra that customer service is not a department; it's an attitude, you know. And so with that attitude, you've got to be first. Anything else you attempted to do, you tried to be first. We were the first to introduce mobile banking. You know, we were the first to start to broaden. Put in agencies outside of Castries and so on to ensure that we gave them full service, and so on and so on. So the mindset of first was psychological as well as practical.
Johnathan, Mr. Glasgow and his team didn't just get involved and try to catch up when it talks about technology and smart banking, but you leapfrogged because, like you said, there were things that you were first in, and that sets a very good platform for you because now you have to think of technology as your key function.
Yeah.
What does it mean to have that kind of a platform to build on?
It definitely helps knowing that the people that are working with you are not technologically averse. We embrace technology, and quite frankly, we think of ourselves not as a bank, but as a technology company that does banking services. And more and more, the demands from our customers force us to find the funds to invest to drive technology. Unfortunately, we don't have a budget like the Canadian banks do or the other big regional banks do, where sometimes that budget is in excess of $100 million US. But I'm pleased to note that, as Carlton said, we were the first to launch mobile banking. And we are deeply involved in upgrading the platform for mobile banking to allow you to do a lot more with mobile banking. We have upgraded our website to make it easier to navigate, easier for customers to communicate with us. We have changed out some of the older ATM machines to improve reliability and functionality, and we'll continue to invest in technology to help move this bank into the future.
There are two things I want to cover with you, Mr. Glasgow. There's a lot to celebrate, and even behind you, we have a cabinet full with a lot of moments.
Yes.
to celebrate.
Yes.
So you mentioned Mr. Robert Fevry as well, in terms of your outreach and also the awards that you won at regional, local levels as well. Talk to us about that part of it, because the bank is now known. You have established, you've set the benchmark for corporate social responsibility, but you've done so much work. People know you now as the bank for outreach to the community. And you sustain that throughout those periods. Talk to us about why that was that important, that segment as well.
Yeah, it is because if you have an institution, a bank is nothing without interfacing with the public. So you had to establish that linkage. And this is where Robert Fevry came in, because he's very good at this, you know. And we set ourselves certain goals. And among those goals was that we should have people think of the relationship of banking and First National Bank as the same way you think of Colgate and toothpaste, you know? so it becomes almost natural to think about it. And so we continued to do all those things that would lead us in that direction. Our presence in the market had to be, because otherwise, like we just mentioned about our budgets.
Yes.
You know, we didn't have the kinds of budgets that other institutions had, but we had to work smart with whatever monies we had, and so we did. And I'll mention this also. We got involved. A gentleman with his advertising company and relationship company who did tremendous work for this bank. Sometimes people see relationships as an exchange of cash, but when the person who's delivering the service gets very much committed to what they're doing, you get different types of results. And I still think that some of the ads that we have been using, we used to use in those days, are still relevant today. You know, and this is the kind of teamwork that we sought to engender. And the result of all of this was all this crystal that we talk about. You know what I mean? Because I think we got about 9 or 10 of them. The ECCB recognized us also for customer service and stuff like this. We won innovation. You know, there are a number of key things that we went for so that we could say to the general public, we are here, we are competitive. We're not a backwater bank or a bank not to be taken seriously. We are, and from my understanding, the other banks in the marketplace started to feel the pressure. Now this comes out of another philosophy. It comes out of the philosophy called blue ocean thinking. You know, you don't worry about the red ocean, where all the killing takes place. Blue ocean is where you develop your own ideas and ensure that they take root, and you see the benefits in the fullness of time. And that is what happened here.
talking about oceans, probably we can start looking at tsunamis as well. You also had to survive a period of turmoil globally with the banking sector.
Yes.
That was quite a challenge for you on the bank at the time.
Well, in 2008, the recession came at us, and I distinctly remember the governor of the central bank calling us to a meeting and explaining to us the dire circumstances that this entire region and the world is going to find itself. And that as small fish in the pond, likelihood of survival was like zero, you know. I didn't quite share that view, because I believe that if you have a good product, they'll beat a path to your door, you know. And our team, and I'll tell you this, sometimes I get credit for a lot of the stuff that goes on. But my own philosophy is that you listen to everybody in your team, starting from the guy who looks after the door, because he may have certain experiences that you may not see yourself. But you listen very carefully to what people have to say. You invite input, you invite criticism. The only thing I ever asked for was to respect my decision, because I had to answer for whatever decision was taken on the floor. But we all were a team who worked together to achieve whatever we agreed we were going for. And that is what I think led to the successes that we had, because we were all involved, you know. Someone mentioned to me that perhaps there was an element of profit sharing involved, which added a certain fillip to the entire thing. But I said, no, you know, people don't think about these things. This is secondary. The commitment to feel a pride in your institution was what really drove all the staff, you know. And some of them I may not call their names now, it's maybe not quite necessary, but they all put their shoulders to the wheel, and we I think we achieved beyond expectations in many ways.
Survival and success and celebration obviously marks your
Two things that stand out for me during that critical period where the recession really started to bite. One of the decisions we made, and it was really a promise to the staff, that there would be no retrenchment. All right? So once you give people security of tenure, I mean, you got to do your job. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? You can't just
You'll be here forever.
Absolutely. But you give them security. As long as you're producing, nobody's going to be let off. Okay? So we kept that promise. So that was very important to us. And the second thing is that we had the blessings of the board. We worked with a board, and particularly Mr. Bam Charles. And I always think about him, because he had to take a lot of criticism sometimes, you know, because he had a certain vision also. We put a vision on the table and he saw it, you know, and we have a lot to be thankful for, and a lot of credit to the two directors, the two chairpersons that I worked with. I think there's a lot of credit due to them.
There is a lot more to come from our 80th anniversary special. The discussion with Mr. Glasgow and Mr. Johannes will continue shortly, and when we do, they talk about an uncertain but exciting future.
Born from the same soil, growing stronger.
Raised of our own sweat and toil, doing it together.
Our bank for you and me,
Taking us forward so proudly.
First National Bank, the best of who we are. First National Bank, together we'll go far. The pride of St. Lucia, here to stay.
Growing up, growing stronger, it's the First National way.
Every day we're banking better, faster and smarter, convenience like no other.
First National Bank,
The best of who we are. First National Bank, together we'll go far.
is no mean feat. 8 decades of banking for St. Lucia's first and only indigenous bank. First National Bank is well placed to maintain that designation for another 80 years. In 2 decades, the bank reaches that magical milestone, 100 years of banking, that century mark. Well, let's find out from the former and current managing directors about that exciting period in our journey. Let's join Bernard Fannis, Mr. Carlton Glasgow, and Mr. Johnathan Johannes.
We're on the cusp of major developments. Globally, there's so much happening. Anytime you turn the news, there's quite a bit happening globally, locally as well. And in the banking sector as well, the landscape is changing. We hear so much talk of mergers, acquisitions, and a lot of things. Johnathan had mentioned the word resistance.
Yeah, you did.
Earlier on, and I wanted to get back to it because obviously the resistance has to continue. As a first indigenous institution, as you came in and you walked through those doors as well, obviously you had some very solid platform to build on. The baton was handed over to you. Your thinking as you walked through the doors.
Well, the first thought I had was, man, I feel pressured to win some crystals, right? But no, in all seriousness, I felt that I was walking into a solid institution that was poised for growth. Really talented individuals, really competent team, but we needed to think bigger and have this belief that we could be as good as the other banks. And my first thoughts were, how could we be that St. Lucian company that grows beyond our borders, that St. Lucians could be proud of? I tell the story all the time. I had this great sense of pride in all St. Lucian companies. And slowly but surely, every single one that I felt would be the one to become a regional entity slowly became part of another regional entity. And I saw First National as being the last great hope of seeing a St. Lucian company, born of St. Lucian soil, founded by St. Lucians for St. Lucians, reaching out beyond our borders and growing into other markets. And I think that is a challenge, and that is a goal, and that is a promise that we have made as a team to ourselves and to our shareholders and to our customers, that we will not continue to think within our borders, but we will think beyond these borders and grow this institution. It's difficult being a banker today, but it's exciting. And I listened to Carlton speak of the times before, and I can still hear the excitement and the passion in his voice. And I feel that same way about today. Even with all the uncertainty, even with all the regulations, it's still an exciting time to be a banker, and there's still opportunity to be an indigenous banker.
We spoke about technology. Obviously, the platform has been built for you, but you have to move at lightning speed,
Yeah.
like everything else. And I mentioned earlier on that when Mr. Glasgow came in, nobody would talk about marijuana in the bank. In the boardroom, there'll be no discussion on that, but now that's in your boardroom, that's being discussed, that's a reality.
It is.
And also the technology is a reality. Talk to us about those vastly emerging challenges that's facing the bank. And we want your thoughts on that, Mr. Glasgow, in just a while. But for you, just thinking about those, how challenging are those, daunting are those?
Every night I lose sleep over de-risking. It's something that hangs over my head, and you just can't seem to get rid of it. It's a concept that we've addressed in our banknotes program, and we've put it out there. And I think St. Lucians understand it a lot better now. But it's a forever hanging burden that you just can't shake. The fact that you could wake up one morning and you are cut off from the international markets due to the loss of your correspondent bank. It's something that we have to take stock of, especially as we see the flight of the Canadian banks. Because these are the banks that are least likely to be de-risked. And as they leave, we could see ourselves in a marketplace cut off from correspondent banking. So it's something that keeps me up at night, and it's something that we pride ourselves on working with the correspondents to ensure that we maintain that relationship. But again, here I am speaking about marijuana. Okay, so the markets are changing. The landscape is changing. On the 10th of December, St. Vincent goes to Parliament, you know. So a lot is happening around us that will affect correspondent banking relationships, that puts those relationships at jeopardy. But again, we must remain resolute, and we must follow regulations and try our best to maintain these relationships. The other thing on the horizon that's going to change life for all bankers is digital currency. But I'm encouraged by the fact that the central bank has taken a leadership position and a pioneering digital fiat currency, which is totally different to Bitcoin, but it's a step in the right direction. And it's exciting to be a banker with all the changes, with all the risk involved. I think First National Bank will be here for another 80 years or even more. And I look forward to the day when I'm sitting in Carlton's chair, right? Relaying the history of my 80 years to the other person who takes over from me.
I still want to get back to the resistance, Mr. Glasgow. During your time as well, and now we said the flight of Canadian banks, but there are also banks that are trying to consume other banks. That's the landscape is changing and so on. Fortunately, you didn't have those decisions to make. You were able to ride that out. I suppose it will be a lot more on Johnathan. There will be a lot more pressure as time goes on. But talk to us about the need, since this is an indigenous institution, to keep maintaining the character of the bank moving forward.
Yeah. I just want to mention to you that talking about this resistance thing, we had a situation where a bank came in and wanted to buy us out, and there's a side to it which we will not relate. But the bottom line is they came in because they were so excited about our institution that they wanted to buy it out. And my simple question to them was, if it is so exciting to you and you want to buy it out, why can't we keep it and make it work? It is a simple thing to me, you know, and that ended the conversation. Yeah, you know. So I am passionate about the growth and maintenance of indigenous institutions. But that is not to say that we must not maintain high standards. You see, this is the key to the whole thing. Indigenous used to be at some point, you know, considered that, well, you're just playing in the field. But indigenous is much more important because, I mean, we have seen institutions which have been around for over 100 years, banks which have been around for over 100 years. When it suits them no further, they disappear, you know, and we are left on our own. The question of de-risking was worked on by a group of banks, indigenous banks in the region, an institution called the ECIC. And we tried to establish our own banking institution in the United States, and we got a lot of resistance there. So it never worked out. So because we saw the de-risking thing coming, it didn't come suddenly. It's been a gradual thing. And we worked and trying to get in Florida a bank which would be the ECIC bank, you know, Eastern Caribbean Investment Corporation Bank, you know. But that did not work, and because too many impediments were put in the way. And so it is not surprising that we are where we are now with the major banks deciding that this region no longer suits them. So my approach to this, as I shared with, again, Dwight Venner at the time when we used to, well, we still do that, don't we?
Yeah, we still do the central bank meetings.
Central bank
very
meetings.
much so.
I always stood out for what I call functional cooperation with the banks. Indigenous banks didn't have to allow themselves to be merged or pushed into merging with anybody else. If you are nimble enough, you can survive and not more than survive, but do well in whatever ocean that exists. But the thing is, you've got to be aware that you cannot be all things to all men, and at the same time, persons across the sea, in Grenada, for example, in St. Vincent, for example, may have something that you can use and vice versa. So functional cooperation, to my mind, was something that we could use to mitigate this entire business of merging and acquisition. You know, it is not necessary. But things are going to take their own course, but our response is what that matters. You see? Because we cannot stop, for example, the de-risking matters that come through in the United States. They are bigger, they bounce you over the head, and how you respond to it is what that matters. I'm thinking that we have few options left to us these days. You know what I mean? And just a quick word on this marijuana and stuff. This is going to work itself out. There's no question about it. I mean, I listened to one of the ministers of government talking about we're going to think about how we respond to, nothing to think about. We got to change our laws to suit whatever they're doing. You can't play big when you're not, and that is what's happening. But we need to be nimble. That's the key. Yeah, we need to be nimble.
Indeed.
And you mentioned functional cooperation. I know there was a letter of intent signed with the Civil Service Credit Union. So we expect to see more of those kinds of engagements?
Yeah, it's a strong point for First National Bank, whereby we see ourselves as proudly indigenous, and we look forward to working with indigenous institutions. Many people think that banks compete with credit unions. Well, to a certain extent we do. But I believe that there can be growth through collaboration. And we have signed a letter of intent with the Civil Service Cooperative Credit Union to allow them to provide members with debit card access. So we have a lot to look forward to with that credit union. It's an indigenous institution just like us. When you listen to their philosophy, you think you're talking about First National Bank. So we almost like family, right? And you can expect a lot more collaboration between First National Bank and other indigenous institutions. I think the future is very exciting. We have a lot planned for 2019 and beyond. And I'd say to people, watch this space. And if you like what we're doing, come do business with us, because we've been here for 80 years and we're not packing up and leaving to go anywhere anytime soon. So it's very exciting. We want to partner with St. Lucian businesses, and even people who think that they are our competitors. We're open to doing partnerships with you as well.
My final question, Mr. Glasgow, with you. I know you're retired and you're probably enjoying retirement as well. But you're still keeping in touch, you're still involved. I think you're probably the ECCB and a few other institutions as well. So I guess you're looking forward to enjoying fully the retirement.
Well, I mean, retirement is something you earn. You know what I mean? You just don't get old and retire. You got to earn your retirement. And I think, I'm saying this to say that you've got to prepare for retirement, and you don't allow yourself to vegetate once you've retired from active work. But retirement is something you earn, because after working for so many years, you've got to give yourself some downtime to enjoy life, the little things of life that you may have missed. This is very important. It's never all about making money or the money or anything like this. Living is in and of itself very important, and that is how I view retirement. But like you said, I remain engaged. I do things where I feel that I'm giving back to our community in my own way, and so on. From the quote-unquote professional standpoint, you also remain engaged, because you cannot allow, even if you're retired, that something called cryptocurrency is around and you haven't got a clue what they're talking about. You know what I mean? That's real vegetation if that happens. So that is my whole approach to this thing. Earn retirement, you enjoy it, make the most of it, because you just never know when your bell will be rung.
Mm-hmm.
Gentlemen, it was a pleasure and a privilege to be speaking with you on this very key moment in the life of First National Bank, 8 years, and now once you pass 80, you start planning for the 90th.
That's right.
And the 100th as well. I really appreciate going down, Mr. Glasgow, down the path of just reflecting on a little bit of the history going back to the mid-30s.
Yes.
When there was depression.
I read history too.
So. But thank you so much for the time, and Johnathan, certainly we look forward to engaging you some more.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Good stuff.
Thank you so much.
It has been indeed a remarkable journey from a back store at Carrasco and Son on Monjero Street, Castries, in the late 1930s to our corporate headquarters in Rodney Bay, Rosalie. We have survived the transition from the sugar plantation to the banana boom, the Castries fire, and the end of the 20th century. And now we prepare for the challenges of technology and climate change. We can't predict the future, but together we can prepare for it. There's one guarantee: we will be here for you. Thanks to Mr. Carlton Glasgow and Mr. Johnathan Johannes for their participation in today's special program. The journey continues. And to Mr. Bernard Fannis for moderating this discussion. I am your host, Sheridan Plummer of First National Bank, wishing you a healthy, rewarding, and successful 2019. And remember, First National Bank is here for you.